China has always been an imperial power, and the system of governance has been that of an imperial state. India has had its own form of governance, which is a quasi-democratic. India is essentially the birthplace of democracy. We have had democracy way before the Greeks had democracy. If you look at the archaeological structure, etc., the evidence from the so-called Indus Valley civilization, era of our civilization, then you will see that there were no royal palaces and any of those things. So it was a democratic setup of some sorts. We don't know exactly what form of democracy it was, but you had a democratic system. We also have the evidence from the Mahajanapadas, which were democratic republics. You had kings and rulers who were elected. They were not hereditary and so on. So India always had this democratic form of government where the people had a lot of rights and a significant amount of power over what happened and what the kind of governance and life they had. So that is the kind of system India had. We don't have specific historical details because our historians have never looked into that as to what exactly was the form of government, how did elections happen, and what specific rights did people have. We don't know about that. But we know that these were more or less democratic setups that we had during the Mahajanapada era. Sometimes we would have emperors like Chandragupta Maurya, like Kanishka the Great, like Rajaraja Chola, Rajendra Chola, like Lalitaditya Muktapida, like Kumaragupta, Skandagupta, etc. But even during the imperial eras, when the entire subcontinent was unified politically under one central leadership, even at that time, at the local levels, you would have local democracies. So at the Gram Panchayat level or whatever, people would elect their local representatives and all that. So that's how it always was. So India was that sort of a system. The Chinese were not a democracy by any means. It was always a hard imperial system. You had these dynastic cycles in which a dynasty would come to power, be in vogue for a couple of centuries or so, then it would crumble. There would be maybe a century of anarchy, then a new dynastic cycle would start and that sort of thing. So that's the kind of system China had. Now, if we compare the two economies historically, India has always surpassed the Chinese economy. India was always the larger economy. India always had more influence on the world culturally and economically. For instance, we know that India had extensive trade with Europe. India had extensive trade with Rome from the western ports in India, especially in Gujarat, Saurashtra, etc., which was at one time controlled by the Indo-Scythian kings, Rudra Daman, Rudra Sinha, etc. And then the Guptas took over and they continued the trade with Europe. So Europe was addicted to Indian products like textiles, like spices, like various other things. And in exchange for these things, the Europeans would send India gold. And that's how India became the largest gold repository in the world. And that's how India was so wealthy. Right. So India accounted for easily more than 1/3 of the entire globe's GDP. So that's how wealthy India was. China was always second, but China obviously always was the second largest power in the world economically and otherwise also. So India had these extensive contacts, trade contacts, cultural contacts with Rome, with Greece, with Egypt as well, with the Middle East, with Persia, with East Africa, and also to the east with China, with Indonesia, Java, Sumatra, Southeast Asia, and so on. So India was essentially the center of the world. China was not so much the center of the world. China had the Silk Route, which was actually an Indian trade route, which later on was called the Chinese Silk Route. So historically, India was the center of the world. India was the center of civilization. The Chinese called India Tianzhu, which means the center of heaven. Center of heaven. That was the Chinese word for India. So India was the global cultural superpower. India was the center of education, the largest economy, the trading superpower. It was also a military superpower from time to time. So if we compare the two civilizations, the oldest civilization was always the greatest and the largest civilization in terms of magnitude of economy and strength. China was always number 2, and India was always more liberal. India is the country that had the democracy. The Chinese never had that. So that's a kind of comparative study of the two civilizations.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.